Hello, my name is Diane Buglioli, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of A Very Special Place Incorporated, which is an agency that provides services here on Staten Island for individuals with developmental disabilities. But today I'm wearing my hat as the co-chairperson of the Willowbrook Property Planning Committee. That's a committee of the Staten Island Developmental Disabilities Council, which is the primary advocacy group here on Staten Island for individuals with developmental disabilities. That council, as well as CTV, have sponsored this wonderful series, Willowbrook Revisited, which is a retrospective look at Willowbrook, the property it was on, the people who lived there, the people who worked there, the events that happened on that property, and the society in which it existed. Today with me, I'm so pleased to be able to introduce to the audience three honorable men who share a historical relationship because of Willowbrook State School. And I want to introduce to you I'm sorry, I wanted to introduce you to them today. With us are Bernard Carabello. Bernard, through misdiagnosis, was placed at Willowbrook as a child, stayed there till around the age of 20. Since that time, he founded the Staten Island, the Self-Advocates Association for New York State.
Right.
Yeah. And continues to be an activist in the field. Tim Casey, interestingly, was a social worker for Bernard back in the late 60s, early 70s at Willowbrook State School. Tim went on to become an attorney and continues in his own right to be an activist of sorts. With them today is Dr. Mike Wilkins. Dr. Mike Wilkins, for those of you we've spoken about the expose, was the physician that gave his key to Geraldo Rivera that he then brought and went over the fence and opened up really the wards of Willowbrook to the cameras of ABC Eyewitness News. Dr. Wilkins was a young physician at the hospital, which was really different. It was an anomaly because most of them were older men. But you and Bill Bronston were young doctors and activists that had worked previously, I believe, at the United States Public Health Hospital. And so Mike has continued to be an activist. Interestingly, all three men's lives intermeshed and have stayed so over the years. I have the privilege of knowing all three of them. Bernard, probably the longest. Tim, I met in a couple of the events we've had, and Mike, I've become friendly with over the last year or so. So it's my privilege to welcome you all here to this show. This series is so important. I think we all share one thing together, and that's that Willowbrook never happened again, or anything similar to it, whether it's a small Willowbrook or a large Willowbrook. So I think I'd like to start with, if we can, experientially, what it was like in those days, because I think the audience, the audience doesn't really have a sense of the texture of what it was like to be there. And perhaps if we could start with Bernard, in terms of, Bernard, what was a typical day for you at Willowbrook?
I get up 5 o'clock in the morning, get dressed, have breakfast, go back on the ward to get ready to go to school. And then after that, back on the ward, doing nothing.
Bernard, when you talk about being back on the ward, describe for somebody what a ward would be like. You're talking about like a day room, right? A day room setting.
Day room for people. It was about 60 to 70 people in the day room with nothing to do. The TV way up on the wall. And you have to look at whatever the staff wanted to look at.
When you talk about getting dressed in the morning, describe what that means, Bernard.
You had to steal your own clothes, put them under your mattress so you could have them the next day. Yeah. And that's what I did. That was a survival technique for me. It's to do for myself, to make sure I had the things I needed.
Right, so that because there was nothing in the day room or in the I guess what would be called the bedrooms, which was really just a large dormitory style room with 70 beds in it, right, very close to
And
each other,
that's about this close.
around 6 inches away from the next bed.
Yes.
And there was nowhere in there, I mean, for people to imagine, nowhere in there was a nightstand, a closet, anything. My recollection is that there were cubicles, that sometimes the clothes were wrapped and put in cubicle with the shoes for the person to be given the next
Yes.
day, right?
Yeah.
And the clothes wouldn't necessarily be yours. They would just be the clothes that were there,
Right.
that fit you, more or
Right.
less. Yeah.
And you had to take whatever you need for the next day.
Right. So if there's something you particularly like, the safest
I
place to
took
do was to put it underneath the mattress.
Yes.
Yeah, because there was no other place.
Yeah.
So that sense of no personal belongings at all.
We did have people
Like what, Bernard?
pile of clothes. They will lock up behind the fence
Yeah.
so nobody could steal them, but they broke the lock and staff used to steal clothes. They broke into my locker, took money out of there.
Yeah. Yeah. So the sense of personal belongings was negligible at that
Yes.
time, very little. Tim, you were a social worker. Now, social worker was seen traditionally as being able to help people to, extend the power in their lives, or to achieve more empowerment in their lives. My recollection, I'm using Mike's numbers here from one of his interviews, there were around 7 social workers, and there, at that time, in the late 60s, there was around 5,700 people living there.
Right, and we really weren't even trained, most of us weren't even trained social workers. I think our civil service title was social work assistant, and basically we had people who had graduated from college and took a job. When I went to Willowbrook, I actually thought it was a school. It was called Willowbrook State School. I needed a job, got very little training, but my main assignment there was to work with adult males who are able to live semi-independently in the community and try to find foster care settings where they could go live and have some sort of employment in the community.
So, did you have any experience going to the buildings, like a building that Bernard's describing?
I did. The building I worked in most is Building 19, and that's where the adult males with the least disabilities live. So that building, comparatively speaking, was not so horrible. The other buildings where people had more severe disabilities, I went there periodically, and they were terrible. Overcrowded, understaffed, terrible smells, terrible scenes, people often naked. You'd hear stories from Bernard and others about physical and sexual abuse, lack of services, lack of programming. It was called a school. I think when I went there were 5,000 or 6,000 residents. Most of them were not going to school, not having any services, doing very little, but sitting in the wardrooms all day. It was a really horrible, horrible place where human rights were just not respected.
Mike, you worked in Building 6.
Yes.
And that was a building that had individuals, much like Bernard is in terms of volume, 60, 70 people in a ward. And not people with all of the skills that, let's say, that Bernard had, as he was misdiagnosed to begin with. But what was your experience when you went to work those days?
Yeah, the first day of work was a real cold shower. I couldn't believe the smell, and I had no training. I was like Tim, so I had finished I was there actually. I'll tell you briefly why I was there. There had been an article in the New Yorker magazine. I'm from Kansas City. I happened to be in New York to do my training in internal medicine. But this article in the New Yorker, when I was still in college, I read about called Pilgrim's Progress, 1961. It was a 2-part series about Pilgrim State Hospital out on Long Island. and that was a good series. And they showed pictures of Pilgrim State Hospital, and it was all about how drugs for schizophrenia had come along, Thorazine in 1954, which allowed better control of the mental illness of people with schizophrenia. And then it was obvious that they could live in the community. And the psychiatrists were all behind it at Pilgrim State Hospital, and they were rapidly housing people in the community. And so I had this impression that in New York State things were going well. And then when I was doing my internship, I was driven out to Staten Island to see a display of unusual developmental disabilities, many of them inherited and some of them acquired. And yet when I was driven through by the pediatrician that I happened to be on pediatrics, it was building after building after building, and I quickly said, this is just like Pilgrim, only it isn't closed. There still is 5,700 people here. Right. And so myself and another person, a close friend of mine, who we were both activists and I committed 2 years to work at Willowbrook. So I sort of knew it would be bad, but I'd never really been in the backwards of any place like that. And so, yes, it was as Bernard described. Each building had 4 units, and there would locked metal doors. And you'd go in the main door, and there was a nurse's station. It was what they call a medical model. So I'm the doctor. I'm in charge. I'm the daddy here, you know. And I didn't know anything about it, and except I could do medical stuff. But you go in the locked doors, and it depended on the level of disability. One unit was completely very disabled people, and with no clothes, semi-clothed. They couldn't control their bowels, needed to be fed, were rocking and displaying all kinds of signs that I probably would display too if somebody put me there. No exit sign, you know, just you're locked in, and they might get out. I think you worked in recreation. The recreational therapist would come and walk them. And Diane Arbus, the photographer, took pictures of some of those people walking around outside the buildings, but mostly they were walking like zombies or something because they were drugged. It was just...
Keep in mind, they only have 2 to 3 staff to take care of 60 to 70 people.
Yeah, we looked at the numbers recently. We were saying at the point when there was 6,000 people living there, there was, this is a rough number, around 2,000 staff. Now, out of that 2,000 staff, take out all the Monday to Friday people who are administrators, the doctors, the nurses, not the nurses, the doctors, the administrators, the teachers, rec people, take them out. So bring it down to around, take 300 out, so bring it down to maybe 1,700, 1,800. Now take that and divide that into 3 shifts.
Yes.
And very few on the overnight, right, Bernard? Maybe 1 on the overnight?
I know because a lot of people call out.
And they would call in and call out. So you're talking about, for those 6,000 people, around 600 people at the most on a shift.
Yes.
So you just look at the ratio. You're at 1 to 100, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. As Bernard said, the day room was there. There would be church pews, some folding chairs. The attendant would sit by one of the doors, either toward the sleeping room or by the front door. Between the sleeping room and the day room were the bathrooms and the storage place for the clothes.
Right.
And in the bathroom, there were no doors on the bathroom. The toilets were shared. That's why they all got hepatitis within 6 months of being there. And then in the back room, cots, as I remember them, and they weren't beds; they were cots, and they were lined up. Is that right? I mean, they could be moved around.
I think they were mostly metal beds. When you say, Bernard, metal beds,
Okay.
I think, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And without any ability to control the actions of the persons with the greatest disability. So they had to be drugged, you know, and they were. The Willowbrook was the biggest employer on Staten Island. They were the biggest by far consumer of psychotropic drugs. And they got worse and not better. That was the thing. It wasn't a school where you learn stuff. You forget stuff at Willowbrook.
It was easy to give drugs out to the people because they never got consent from the families.
No, consent, I mean, there was no such thing as informed consent at that time, for sure.
No.
Yeah.
Because even for the hepatitis studies that were conducted there, there's always been a question, did they properly did they really inform the parents of what was going to happen to their children?
Yeah, they didn't. That's a whole nother story.
whole nother story,
I
is the
debated
hepatitis
a
studies,
guy
yeah.
about that after the expose came out. But it is another story. But what we're talking about now is a condition. So I had an office under the stairs to go up to the second floor. So you go up to the second floor, and there was in the middle a dining area, and but 2 day rooms. The lobby, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were day rooms on 2 sides. There were the 4 day rooms. There'd be there'd be 280 people in one building.
Yeah.
And the strange and bizarre thing about it was, it'd be like an army barracks or a nursing home, but there was no plan. It was a warehouse for humans, and it smelled bad. The sounds were eerie because people were screaming. They were in misery. I don't remember ever seeing a kid play there. They were in their own cocoon, and so it was not a good place. Yeah. And so I was committed to trying to deinstitutionalize it, even from the time I went there. And so then our next job was to try to find some support. And there were social workers there. A lot of people got it, and there were a lot of really good people there. But without a plan, there was no plan.
I mean, it's either you or Tim mentioned it was a medical model, but in actuality, it really was a custodial.
Right.
It was a custodial model.
Right.
Because there's, Bernard, you mentioned going out to, you went to programs, so you went to education, maybe Building 3?
I went to school,
You went to school.
if you want to call it
Yeah,
that.
but was that Building 3 at the time?
Yeah.
Right, Building
Yeah.
3. So there were some people there who they deemed to be, excuse the language, but they deemed to be educable,
Yes.
right? Which was the term then, right? Educable, and actually, the
Trainable.
majority of people were considered non-educable, which is just, is just heinous.
Yeah.
But, so you actually went, but those people who didn't, Bernard, they were back in those day rooms, really sitting there unless somebody from recreation came along, doing nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember the time they were giving out cookies and candy. Instead of going around the room, giving it in their hand, they would throw it on the floor, and the people would fight over it. And
Yeah.
at that time, I didn't think nothing of it. As I think about it today, I can't believe that was. I cannot believe that was done to the people.
Yeah. I mean, you've talked about, we've heard you speak before, and actually, when we were talking just before, you talked about really some of the mistreatment that you suffered as a young person there.
Yeah, when I was about 10, 11 years old, I was beaten so bad in Building 6. There was this one, I'm not going to mention her name, but she used to beat me day after day after day. And when I hit back, they put me in a straitjacket and sedated me. and put me in a room with a mattress on the floor.
Seclusion, basically, yeah?
Yeah.
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 And Mike, I mean, when faced with these types of things, I know that you and the other young doctor that was there would be Bill Bronston, said this is just deplorable. What do we do to stop this or change this? And you weren't met with open arms from administration at that time, as I recall.
No. So we identified that there were a lot of good people working there, but on the other hand, they needed to keep their job. The most positive force, it turned out, were the family members that would come on Sundays. They would come on the ferry, take the bus out to Staten Island, out to Willowbrook, and then they would take their family member, usually their kid, sometimes a sibling, out, and they were not allowed to go in the back wards. The kid, they would come and make their presence known, and then their child would be dressed and brought out to them in this day room. They were told, no, you would be disruptive. They're at peace, but whenever anybody goes back there, it riles everybody up. So we can't let you back there.
And only, if it keeps your thought, but they were only allowed to do that on Wednesdays and Sundays.
Right.
I don't even
2
remember
days.
that. Is that
That's
right?
2 days, Wednesday and Sunday.
Right.
Yeah.
For
So,
a block of hours, and that was it.
so we, outside of Building 6 and Bill's building, we had a weenie roast on Sundays, and we brought somebody like a teacher or physical therapist to talk about what is the current standard of care for the developmentally disabled. And we found that the parents knew more about it than us. They had struggled to try to get services and failed. And you got to work. You don't have all the money in the world to hire a full-time person to take care of your kid. They were frustrated. They were angry, and they were smart. And our group quickly grew because they knew each other. And so then we had got in touch with a fellow named Gunnar Dibwad, who was the World Health Organization expert on developmental disabilities, I'll say. In those days, it was called mental retardation.
Yeah.
Which I want to say is a bad word, and that's when even with a friend of mine, if they say you're retarded, I say, wait a minute, that's like the N word, you didn't. But anyway, Gunnar came, and we toured Gunnar through Willowbrook, and he said he couldn't believe it. And then we had a public, and then we toured another guy named Dr. Dick Koch from California, and he was appalled. But we had this public conference on Staten Island about the topic of Willowbrook, and Gunnar Dibwad said, "You treat your retarded worse than we treat our animals," and because he was from Scandinavia, and so our group grew, and that was the source of change, and so that gave everybody hope and a focus of how we can get out of this place, how we can create an exit sign. Because even in some of the states, even in California where Dr. Koch was, they had developed they'd stopped the admissions actually to the state schools. And so there was a model, but there was a tremendous resistance. I think your original question was, were we welcomed by the administration? No, nor were we welcomed by the other doctors, because they all took it personally, like we were criticizing them. No, we were criticizing the system.
Absolutely.
And it was never going to work. It's no person with developmental disabilities is going to get better if you take them away from their family.
Yeah.
Got to have somebody to love you and to talk to you and read stories to you and to teach you how to play. So it grew quickly. And as it grew, we were persona non grata. We were attacked, basically. And because we were verbally attacked. Yes, verbally attacked.
Well, to the point that eventually you were terminated. by the administration.
Right. We were told to stop going to the parents' meetings. It's interesting. There was two parents groups. Ours, they were the rebels, and then there was the benevolent society, which was a good group, but they were focused on helping the current system
Stay
be
in
a little
place.
better.
Be a little better, yeah.
So we ended up not getting along with many of the benevolent society. But I'll never forget one time we went to a dinner that they had at a big hotel in Manhattan, but given by the Benevolent Society.
Right.
And Bill and I were activists. We came out of a anti-racism and anti-war background. And one of the speakers, and I think it was somebody from the ARC actually, stood up and said, the problem is the Epilepsy Society and the United Cerebral Palsy, they're getting our cut of the money. And Bill, who was a much more experienced and older person than me, he stood up and said, no, it's the war in Vietnam. So we were creating a different attitude, and it wasn't welcome. And you can understand, because these were parents, and they have feelings about their kids, and what we were saying, it was a bad place, and they were probably having guilt and all of that, but they didn't need to. They were victims. So that was the tension there. That was one of the sources of tension.
Sure, yeah.
What we were saying wasn't that welcome, because this was the poster boy for institutionalization. But it wasn't working. That was so obvious.
Yeah.
But we couldn't get anyone to believe us.
They used to brag that it was the largest such institution in the country. They used to brag about how many people they had there. It was just, it was appalling, absolutely appalling.
I mean, the thing is that, we look back and we say, that when this place was first, the legislation met, and this was in the 1930s, and said, we're going to open this Willowbrook State School. We're going to open a state school because we need something, we need some sort of support for families. And so it sort of was state of the art, right? Then the 1940s, when it's supposed to open, the war happens, and it becomes Halloran Hospital for a number of years. And then after that, they open it for their original purpose, which is like in 47 or 48, whatever. So the intent of it wasn't bad, right?
Right.
It's just what happened once the model, it didn't work. And we needed to change gears, and we didn't. And it stayed in place too long.
Right.
With budget cuts
when I
happening
was
one after the other.
Growing up in the 40s, I had a friend, Joel Hefner. I was living in Des Moines at that time, and he had a sister with Down syndrome, and his mom was a nurse. She was a good friend of my mom's, and their doctors said, this child is going to be disruptive in your family and tear your family apart, and they really like it better when they're with people like themselves. And they put their child in the institution in Iowa, and that always stayed with me. I mean, the parents were advised by the physician to do that.
Yeah.
And that was the only option. And it had started with good intentions.
Yes.
And they were state schools, and there were probably some good ones someplace, but it was still taking the person away from their family as though they weren't a
and
person.
society, really, in a way, right, Michael? It's really more than just the family. They really are segregated into a separate society,
Yes.
which is really where, we know people will not thrive in that setting. And in fact, the setting was so austere, and Bernard, you said, at some point you became desensitized to certain things that you saw, and then later on in life, when you thought about them, people working there, Tim and Mike, I mean, we became desensitized to certain things, because otherwise it'd be hard to work there.
Right.
After a while, you saw things that you just went past it. I never saw someone being abused. If I had, I hope that I would have intervened. I worked with the children, and I worked in Building 21 after that. So I was in different types of buildings, so I didn't see that much where there were really, really severe behaviors.
Well,
But I know I became desensitive to the showering, and I know I became, because I'd have to pick people up for my evening class, and the girls would be just being showered like they were inanimate with a wand, right, Bernard? I mean,
the same thing in my building. They would use the same pill that they scrubbed the floors with. They use on the people to soak them down.
My office was in building 2, I believe, the biggest building.
Building 2.
But the dental clinic was in the same building, and you'd often hear these terrible screams. And I remember one of us went down one time and said, well, isn't this something you could do? He said, well, they don't really feel pain.
don't feel pain.
And you'd hear the screams, and then you say, how can they, what are you saying? They don't really feel pain. So, but
You know, I once I sustained a cut on my head in a building. The attendants thought it was funny. There was an individual that had some really difficult behaviors, and I was a recreation worker, and they told this girl, Patricia, that I didn't put her on the trip list, and she was really angry with me, and she was chasing me around the room with her shoe. And I kept on saying, on the next trip, I swear you'll be on the next trip. But anyway, she hits me with this shoe, and I sustain a cut in my skull. So they bring me out to the nurse's station, and the physician's there. And he started to do sutures. And he gave me nothing. And I said, "Wait, what? Stop!" You know. And the nurse said, "No." I know, Bernard. That's what I'm saying. There was a desensitization that was strange.
Right.
And another subset of everything is that a lot of the doctors that were there were Holocaust survivors themselves, and that's a story in itself.
Yes.
Because that campus, for them, became a safe haven. They had all the doctors' living quarters were all in the back, remember, along with Executive Way now?
Talk English at all.
Yeah, they had some of them had
they also
little
use residents
skills.
as basically slave laborers, slave laborers in the housing to clean the houses and help out around the house. It was just
Right,
really
without pay, basically.
an
to just
exploitative place.
clean in the director's office, to do the buildings and different things like that. It's true that there was very little staffing, but still there should have been an accommodation for somebody who's now working, doing a job that they should be compensated for it. But the desensitization that happened, not only, it had to, I guess, on some level for the people who lived there and the people who worked there, because I don't know how else you would survive if you didn't desensitize to some of it.
One of the staff asked me to mop the floor, and I told her, no, I ain't getting paid for it. She beat the hell out of it. I mean, she beat the daylight out of me.
And this is a time when you're young. I mean, you're
I was about
I was going to say teenager?
17,
Yeah,
18.
teenager.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, we've all said that there were good people working there. We were working there. We consider ourselves good.
Yeah.
But there were good people
There was
working
a
there.
lot of good people
Yeah.
there.
But there were people weren't vetted in the same way
No.
to work in the field, right?
Right.
I mean, there were people that never should have been
Right.
working there, and we know that for sure.
Bill Bronson caught this one attendant with belt in her hand, and she knocked and replaced it. And she used to take it and crack it over the individual's heads and all that. Bill had to take 3 or 4 away from her. Every time he took one, she'd get another one. And she never got fired.
Yeah. Talking about that a doctor intervenes to try and stop this person who's assaulting another
Yeah.
3 or 4 times, and there's no consequence for that staff person. And the fear, I would imagine, if I were locked on that ward, that person is staying there, and nobody is taking them away from me to keep me safe.
Exactly,
That
yeah.
freedom, there wasn't even the freedom from harm, which I think was part of what was the consent judgment, was freedom from harm.
Right, yeah.
It wasn't really right to treatment. It ended up coming down to freedom from harm, which people didn't have.
Really, it's torture And if there is any human right, it's got to be the right not to be tortured. And they were being tortured. And another aspect of it, just as a physician, a new admission. I didn't get very many in Building 6 because of the age group. Mostly they were admitting younger people.
Yeah.
But this boy would be coming in from his family, and what am I supposed to say? I don't want to make him feel bad, or leave and cry. But I know that first night, this kid is going to not have the same experience that they'd had before, if you get what I mean. And so you feel tainted, but you're put in a position over and over again of like not doing a good thing, a bad thing, because what am I going to do? Send this kid back home? Their parents have waited on the waiting list for a long time. It's just like this kid's got to be here. But I'm tainted with this thing. I stink of Willowbrook, that's the phrase I give. Over and over again.
We have a friend, her name, the only way she get her daughter into Willowbrook to be a part of the hepatitis.
Yeah.
You
that was-
know who I'm talking
Yeah,
I sure do,
I mean, what Bernard's referring to is that when the hepatitis studies were going on in the 50s and into the 60s, parents, it extended beyond, but it started around that time, that parents were told that they could be admitted if they signed the paperwork that the person would be in the hepatitis studies.
because they gave them, they told them a lot of good other stuff, and that's why they signed the paper.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the consent form didn't say anything about the fact that half of the residents wouldn't get any benefit from it. They'd be in the placebo group, if you will. But to give them their due, it was a successful research program from a scientific point of view. It's just that you can do the same thing. I mean, primates, monkeys get hepatitis. You could do the same thing. It would have been maybe a little less real world, but they actually administered the serum and the feces of current residents who'd had hepatitis to these people, the new admissions, and they were in a much newer building with 16 beds on a ward instead of 70, much cleaner, higher, bigger staff.
Right.
But they did discover in the 50s that gamma globulin would attenuate the symptoms of hepatitis. And then worldwide, gamma globulin was the treatment for hepatitis. That was a good thing. And then in the 1960s, Dr. Krugman, he was the chairman of the Department of Pediatrics at New York University School of Medicine, published an article in the New England Journal of Medicine about this is hepatitis A, because they knew that the kids would get hepatitis twice. First 6 weeks after they would get exposed, and then 3 months after. So the first 6 weeks was hepatitis A. So that was what he first discovered. They called it hepatitis A. And then in the early 70s, article about hepatitis B, characterizing that. As a physician, I endorse that, but again, if you'll notice, he did not get the Nobel Prize for that, because it goes down in history not for being a good thing that they finally dealt with hepatitis, a worldwide disease, but that they chose to work on
The ethics of
handicapped
it.
people.
The ethics of
People that had no options. Right, the ethics.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's right up there with Tuskegee when you
It
say,
is.
right?
Yes,
The little
where they
studies.
gave black people syphilis.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, as one of the staff who caught hepatitis in the baby
You
unit.
did, yeah.
I was within my first 6 months, I came down with hepatitis. And because staff really weren't informed of,
Yeah.
the status of different things. And so infection control isn't what it is today. People don't have all the information.
Right. There were no gloves.
There were no
You-
gloves or whatever. And as I worked with babies, I worked with infants, so I contracted it. But
I got tested when I left Willowbrook. Luckily,
you were tested?
yeah, I was exposed. I didn't have.
Oh, that's good.
I just got exposed.
Right.
You were exposed to it. Yeah, for sure.
And what they could test you for was hepatitis B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might have, a lot of people get hepatitis. I
Hepatitis
think
A.
everybody got A,
Yeah.
pretty much. But that goes away.
Yeah.
B stays with you.
These days, yeah, that's what I had. So let's go back. So now we know that we have all of these different conditions there. We know that we're aware of it and we're saying it needs to change. Then comes your friendship really with Geraldo Rivera at the time. You knew him from working on something else with him, as
Right.
he was a young reporter at the time. And you get terminated, but you have the key.
Right. Yeah. The way I met him, I was involved in a civil disobedience exercise with a civil rights group, and I got arrested. And he was assigned as my attorney. Was an attorney when I met him, and he got me out and did a good job and helped with another civil rights issue that I was involved in. And we became friends and hung out. And I met his first wife. It was the daughter of who wrote
Kurt Vonnegut?
Kurt- yeah,
Kurt Vonnegut,
yeah,
yeah.
it was Margot
Kurt
Vonnegut.
Vonnegut, yeah.
Yeah. So so we stayed friends. But then as he got into TV, he sort of went his way and I went mine. But we still had each other's phone numbers. So they forgot to take my key. And so the guy that was a manager in my building, he was assigned to give me my pink slip. I think there's a thing about cowards not wanting to, when they fire someone, they're not going to fire them in person.
Really.
Does that sound
Yeah.
familiar?
It's like President Trump, right? Yeah.
And so he assigned the supervisor of my building, and he was upset, and I was upset, and he handed me my pink slip, but he forgot to take my key. So I went home, and I realized I had my key. And then, so I called Geraldo. I said, hey, I'll do this if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes from there that Geraldo comes in and he really exposes what's happening at Willowbrook night after night after night. I mean, relentlessly.
Right.
To the point that the families then come together, some of the families that you worked with, and some of the names like Diana McCourt, Jerry Isaacs, Willa Mae Goodman, they become plaintiffs. Yeah? Say?
Ida Rios.
Right.
Rios, yeah.
Yeah.
They all become
Charlie
plaintiffs
and-
then?
Charlie and Connie Haney
Right.
from my building. Yeah.
So now they become plaintiffs, they sue the state of New York, and what happens later is the consent judgment, which basically says people have a right to freedom from harm, and that there are certain standards that have to be met, and the primary thing is that they're going to deinstitutionalize Willowbrook.
Right.
Now, Tim, as a social worker, were you there at that time? Were you left just prior to that, I think?
Well,
yeah?
I left as that was beginning because although, again, I was not a licensed social worker, and I
You
had
worked as a
hoped,
case manager, basically.
yeah, and I had hoped that the state used to have a program I called educational leave, where if you worked for them for a couple of years, they would offer to pay your salary while you went to social work school in return for you returning, and then giving
so many years,
yeah. So I was next in line for that, but because I was supportive of the parents group and of Bernard, I was told that I would get educational leave when hell froze over. so I went off to NYU Law School and became a lawyer and worked on progressive issues in my career. So,
Yeah. But when you were there, I mean, those types of opportunities were not present in the community to make placements, because you did some work in terms of when you were there for maybe vocational placements or what.
There were some people who had the least disabled, and there were some programs that I worked on with others to try to place them in the community. But the vast number of people who were there solely because they did not have services in the community that families needed to keep them home. And that was the real tragedy. The other tragedy, of course, is people who never should have been there at all.
Right.
But the people who needed services, they didn't have to be institutionalized. And we know the institutionalization usually has negative impacts on people. So,
And both the people who work there and the people,
Yeah.
more dramatically on the people who live there.
You got me out.
I did, but that I was one of the people who helped get you out. Geraldo Rivera and Mike and a lot of our friends at Winter Avenue were also very supportive and very helpful. So, not by myself. It was and you deserve most of the credit
With a whole
yourself.
group of people.
Yeah.
They say it takes a village, right?
Yes.
So when did you actually move out, Bernard?
72.
1972.
Yeah.
All right, that was prior to.
January.
Yeah. And then from there, you.
January 6th.
Yeah, you know the date for sure, right? January 6, 1972. That should be an anniversary that you celebrate, I would imagine, right?
I guess another part of it was when I first worked there, I guess, I'm not sure it was 1970, 1971, a group of us decided this can't be legal. This must be violating constitutional rights. So we actually went to a local law office, and they said, no, there is no claim at this point on the federal law, no basis of bringing a lawsuit. But then over the next year or two, there were cases filed in other states, in Alabama and a few others,
That's
trying
right.
to
In the
establish
1970s, that all starts like there's
constitutional
this shift
right.
happening
Right.
outside of Willowbrook,
Right.
society-wise, right?
Right. So it was both the publicity from the Geraldo Rivera and the parents group, but then a change in the law, creating an advance in the legal framework that provided a basis for the lawsuits that were brought to make Willowbrook a better place.
Yeah.
Or actually end Willowbrook. I'm sorry.
And Willowbrook,
Yeah,
you
I'm
know,
sorry. Not make it a better
yeah,
place.
not
But,
make
yeah.
it better. Because it wasn't even until 1974, that's when the public law changes for people with special needs to even go to the Board of Ed. Right. It's 94-172, I think, is that law doesn't come in until 1974. So prior to that time, if you have a child with a disability, they don't have the rights to go to Board of Ed. So, you know, it's how some of the agencies really began. I use AHRC as the example in terms of the parent puts an ad in the paper that says, I have a kid with a disability. Is anybody else out there? Maybe we can get together and do something together. And so they started like a program together, almost like, you know, you mind my kid, I mind yours, but let's have a program. Let's do something meaningful with them. And that's how some of those programs then were starting to get into place. I mean, society was changing
Yes.
outside, and it was like the perfect storm in a way, right? The key, they expose it, and society was starting to say there's something really amiss here. Right?
Yeah.
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 So for you three honorable men that are here today, what do you see as where we are right now, and what would you say is the focus that activists and advocates need to look at now with the things that are changing around you? You've seen the pendulum swing, and some of us have a sense that the pendulum's swinging again. And what is it that you would focus on? What would you recommend to people?
It's hard to say because it's starting to go backwards again instead of forward. I suggest that we continue to fight for what we believe in for people with developmental disabilities. And then mine was going on in Washington, D.C., but you can't do that either because you don't know how much money they're going to cut out from under us.
You know, Betty Connolly always said, and I use her phrase all the time, you're a budget cut away from Willowbrook. And, you know, what happened, and she's right. I mean, and she, you know, she really was talking about those sustained cuts that this field has had for the last 5 years. And we're at that place where, you know, the straw that breaks the camel's back. Is this the budget cut that's going to send us really where we start to not be able to recover? So I think that's certainly the funding is always an issue, and the fact that a lot of the services now and the budgeting and everything seems to come from Department of Health more than the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. So when we were there, we were under the Department of Mental Hygiene at the time, right? That was and then it was a consent judgment and certain moves that really created a separate office so that you really could track what was happening with the dollars that were supposed to be going to people with disabilities. Do you see something now happening that?
Here's what I think is that, I'll quote James Baldwin, who said, racism is a white person's problem. And I would say that the problems that disabled people have is the prejudice of non-disabled people. And I think that I don't think you can just bootstrap yourself out of racism. You got to be around people that of color. And if you're a person of color, you got to be around a white person. You probably have some racism too. It goes both ways. So integration, and it's like what Harvey Milk said: if you're gay, come out, come out. We're in people's families. We're everywhere. We just have to break down the prejudices and the barriers, the mental and emotional barriers, and that feeling, that's not me, and I want to get away from that. It's a poverty to put yourself in that attitude. So that I think I put my hope in that. Dr. King, we've had so many good leaders. Ed Roberts I quoted Ed Roberts when he's the guy that said it's the problem that I face as a disabled person. He said was the prejudice of other people. It's not I can be disabled, but people shun me, and had that attitude. So that's.
We need a candidate again.
Well, you need somebody who's going to advocate strongly and who's going to promote diversity on all levels.
Somebody like Bobby Kennedy or Marie Fly, they're not around no more.
Yeah, a family that was opened their hearts and because of family history, that they said this is normal. This is family. We're all family, and we so yeah, that type of a leader certainly. But I guess I agree with you, Mike. It's really a matter of, isn't it? It's really a matter of diversity on every level, whether it be gender, race, disability, sexual preference, whatever, that, an accepting of people around you and and having an interest in them thriving,
right,
and you thriving,
and a curiosity about other people, and to see. I'm glad that there's people that are different. It enriches all of us, and I hope that is
it's the same thing like in music. If you sing one note, it's kind of monotone. It's not very interesting. But when you have the diversity of all the different notes, you have harmony and a beautiful result. And I think probably it's true that way for humanity. But I think it takes a lot of work. Tim, you came from both fields now, social work and law.
I think, but beyond that, beyond sort of a cultural change and acceptance of people who you think of as different, money, public investment in public funds, many people who have disabilities are, in some sense, more expensive to the public budget. And unless we're willing to invest in people so they have an equal opportunity to thrive, they won't be able to thrive equally. So, and my concern, I've worked mostly since leaving Willowbrook on issues of poverty and welfare. And my concern of what's happening in Washington and many states now is just a disinvestment in public services generally. Which has negative impacts throughout on all our communities, and the concern that things seem to be going in the wrong direction, and I worry about the long-term consequences.
Yeah, when you hear it, it becomes really clear, that someone who's poor, someone who's disabled, someone who's disenfranchised for whatever reason, that, outreaching a hand, who in their life doesn't have one of those things, one of those circumstances touching them? Who? Probably no one. So, how can we be so narrow-minded as if not to not embrace them all?
You
And
know what's scary? I gave a talk in Brooklyn at college, community college. There were 35 people in the classroom, and they all take special ed. And I asked how many people know about Willowbrook. Not one raised their. That is scary.
yeah, I mean, and that's the reason why we're doing this show, and the Willowbrook Mile, which I've explained to the audience before, is so important, because I don't think people understand the full breadth of continuum of what's possible to occur if we're not mindful of the rights of people around us.
If you don't remind people about Willowbrook, we could go right back into that.
I know. We, at one time, years and years ago, Bernard, a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, when I first started to talk about doing something, I wasn't sure what it was going to be, and I saw you. We were at some meeting together, and I said, "What do you think about this concept, Bernard?" And you said to me, "Bomb the place. I don't want anything there. Bomb it. I don't want it. I don't want any type of a memory of it." And then we talked more and more about it. And we both got older and more experienced in things. And I kind of let by the wayside. Then I saw you like around 5 years later. And I said, but I'm thinking of doing this. And you said to me, "I think that's a good idea." So I said, okay. And because I said, if I don't have Bernard agreeing with me, I'm not going forward. If he's with me, then I'm next to him and we'll do this. I think it's such an important thing. I think the Willowbrook Mile is so important because I think people need to know what happened there. They need to know I keep using the word the texture. I don't want to say horrendous, but they need to know the texture of what people will do to other people because nobody told them not to do it.
There's got to be a history time as you go into the college.
Yeah.
For everybody to see before they enter the college.
I agree, and so I'm grateful because I know Bernard and Mike have been working with me, and I know I can just ask him to be involved in as we go forward with the mile, because those of us that are in this now, we're standing on your shoulders. You've given us the foundation, and people look towards me and say, well, Diane's been she's been spearheading the mile, but I'm standing on your shoulders. You're the guys that really gave us the foundation to go forward and be able to highlight this. So I think I thank you so much for being here today. I'm glad that you were here to share it with the audience. The audience will be more wise for it, one would hope, and maybe have them question more, maybe think about it conceptually, some of the things that we talked about. So I thank you. I hope to see you again in other circumstances. And I think, let's all work together to try and move this pendulum in the right direction.
Yeah.
Right, Bernard? I have one of those chairs. I found one of those chairs from the day rooms. Remember the ones that sort of a free-form chair? And I bought a couple of them. I saw them. They were down on Houston Street, and they told me it was an Italian design. I said, "That's not Italian design. That's a chair from the 1950s for institutions." And I bought a bunch of them. And I think we have it at the archives now. And the thing is, our mission is to keep that chair empty, and that chair never be filled again. So that brings us to a close of another segment of Willowbrook Revisited. I want to thank all of you for being here with us today. I hope that it has given you all some thought about some concepts that maybe you struggle with yourself in terms of diversity, but certainly that gives you a better sense of what happened at Willowbrook and why it should never happen again. Thank you. Thank you very much.